This is my 3-week-long trip to Panama. I had 4 places roughly planned out when I went, starting it all in Panama City, where the airport got me into the country, and seeing some of the canal action. From there I would make my way to Santa Catalina for some pristine surfing and some diving in Isla Coiba, which is a natural reserve just off the coast of Santa Catalina and the Pacific. From there I would go to Boquete for some hiking next to a volcano and some coffee plantation tours, and I top it all off in the archipelago of Bocas del Toro in the Caribbean. It all started in Panama City, where, like most people, I got into the country by means of the airport. The same night I had to dip my toes into the Pacific. The next morning I then started to explore the city by means of the Cinta Pacifica, which reminded me a lot of Miami. There's an asphalt road that is free to bicyclists and skaters and pedestrians all the way through the city, with amazing views of the Pacific Ocean, a couple of landmarks like here, Flag of Panama and the Panama sign, and it gets you all the way to Casco Antiguo, the old part of town that you can see off in the distance here, which is basically the old town center with amazing architecture, colorful houses, and it gets you all the way around to the other side where the canal is located. I then also went to a little hill within the city to get a better view of the old town, and went to some nature parks as well. There's a lot of nature in Panama City here. Then obviously I had to stop by the canal. It was amazing to see those huge boats go through the jungle and this man-made duck canal here. It was a little bit rainy as the rain season had already started by the beginning of April, but that didn't take away from the amazing experience of seeing these huge boats being lowered and raced through the locks. I went to Miraflores here. Then I also went to the old town of Panama City, which was sacked by pirates in, I believe, the 15th century. It's really cool to see. There's audio guides that you can get on your phone, and it tells you a little bit about the story of the first colonization attempts of the Americas, really, which all started here in Panama. Then I explored the Casco Viejo, which was this old town of Panama, which has a basilica, which is going to be very important later on. I went inside to see the floats that they already prepared for the Semana Santa, which is the Easter week, and this is a very important week to the Catholic people of Panama. Throughout the weekend, I wanted to see the processions that they had in store for Good Friday and then as well for Easter Sunday. The processions on Good Friday had a very solemn vibe about them. I'm leaving the audio of the video on here so that you can get an impression of what it was like. Good Friday is the highest holiday for the Catholic Christians in Panama, and while there was a big sort of religious vibe, people were still together out in the streets and celebrating this together. They were celebrating the death of their Lord Jesus Christ, who died for them, and you can see this because everybody was wearing black. It was sort of a sad atmosphere that was in stark contrast to what we will see later over the Easter days. I was absolutely honored to be able to be part of this procession and these festivities, and the locals were very inviting, very happy to make me part of their celebration, which I really enjoyed and really appreciated. The floats were absolutely humongous, with many monks having to carry them through the city, and they were brought into the basilica, which is reminiscent of the crypt that Jesus was laid into. The vibe then really changed on Easter Sunday, as it was time for celebration. The floats were taken out of the basilica, this metaphorical crypt, and people were in the streets partying, celebrating. The music and the tone changed very drastically, and we were all invited to follow the floats and the bands around the old town, and many people followed. Panamanians, but also some tourists, and again I had this amazing feeling of being part of the celebration, of being welcomed there, of being invited to celebrate Easter with the Panamanians. And this was all topped off by being part of the Mass also in the huge basilica in the old town, which I didn't know if I should actually go there, but I was actively invited and encouraged by the local Panamanians, which again was such a show of hospitality that I just deeply appreciated. After this weekend of celebration, it was then finally time to leave the busy city for the tranquil surf beaches of Santa Catalina. Unfortunately, I don't have any footage of the actual surfing, as I didn't feel comfortable to hold a GoPro in my hand while having a go at the waves. But you can see from the footage here that the waves were wonderful. This is sort of the beginner, maybe intermediate beach. There's La Punta, which has more of a reef sort of surf, which is more for the advanced surfers. And there's actual world pros who come there for some good surfing. Santa Catalina itself was very tranquil, very few tourists. There's maybe 1,000 inhabitants in the village. It's absolutely wonderful. But without a doubt, the highlight of the trip to Santa Catalina was the diving in Isla Coiba. Isla Coiba is a nature reserve, which means there's an absolute abundance of wildlife. We saw a turtle here, barracudas, there's an octopus, and the reefs itself weren't necessarily full of color. The water is sort of cool, it being the Pacific Ocean, but the abundance of wildlife and large wildlife is absolutely incredible and worth the trip to Santa Catalina, which to my knowledge is the only way of getting to Isla Coiba. At the very beginning, we saw a couple of white-tip reef sharks. They aren't too large, so they were a good introduction to what was to come later when we actually encountered a couple of bull sharks. For our breaks, we went to the beaches of the islands, which were absolutely pristine. There's no way of getting to the islands. There are no roads on the islands. So the only visitors are other divers who are there for a lunch break. Absolutely fantastic. The highlight of this dive trip certainly were our encounters with the bull sharks. The dive instructor was very knowledgeable and brought us directly to a dive spot where they usually hang out, and the waters were a bit murky. There was a lot of floating particles that were brought in by currents, which usually isn't a particularly good thing because that means reduced visibility. However, in this case, because these bull sharks kind of like to hunt in murky waters, that meant that there were a lot of them around us. Well, these bull sharks were very curious and maybe even interested in what these weird creatures were doing in their underwater habitat. At no point did they show any sort of aggression towards us. They might seem like scary creatures, and Hollywood certainly played their part in it, but really they are very threatened, and we should put a lot of effort into preserving the species, which has a key role in the health of the ecosystem of these reefs that we enjoy as divers. Leaving behind the heat of Santa Catalina, it was time to go to the mountain town of Boquete, next to Volcan Baru, the only volcano in Panama at 3,400 meters. I think the village itself was at something like 1,400 meters, very tall up as well, and it was a pretty beautiful place to be in. There's a lot of American expats who have discovered this town for themselves as well, and generally there's a very nice accommodation. I was staying in this sort of bubble hotel you can see on the videos here, and I arrived just in time for some festivities and celebration for 115 years of the creation of Boquete. This was celebrated all weekend long with a lot of different traditions. There was dances and there was markets, but the highlight must have been the cabalgata, which basically means a lot of people on horses going through town with music in tow. And you can see that here. There must have been probably 1,000 horses and riders. The weather wasn't great, but nobody was discouraged from participating. The climate in the mountain is a bit cooler, but still very, very comfortable, and the festivities proceeded. Panama is now famous for its cafes, particularly its specialty cafes, and most of them are grown around the region of Boquete because it's very high up and the soil is very fertile around the volcano. And I took this opportunity for a couple of coffee tours that included coffee tastings, and they are particularly proud of their geisha variety, which put Panama back on the map of coffees. Since it's a mountain town, there was also some climbing involved, and the rocks here are particularly interesting as they are formed by a combination of an old lake that dried up and different tectonic plates being pushed into each other. So these sort of very soft rocks have been formed into interesting shapes for climbing. Panama has all sorts of different kinds of jungle. There's the rainforests, which we can witness here, but there's also the dry kind, the arid kind. It was interesting to see the different varieties of flora and fauna in all of these different jungles. Around Boquete there's a ton of waterfalls because it's the wetter kind of jungle that you would encounter there, and hiking up to see them is an absolute adventure. This place was also pretty free of other tourists. I saw maybe 2 or 3 other people in the jungle. It's a little bit adventurous to get there with the tiny little shuttle buses that go around. They cost you like maybe 50 cents, maybe it was $1, I forgot. But they will bring you out very, very far out of Boquete, where you actually start your hike up to these waterfalls. And the paths are actually kept in really good condition. I wouldn't recommend necessarily going swimming in any of these waterfalls. It was also pretty cold and raining a little bit, but that added to the rainforest sort of feeling that was going on there. The last leg of the journey had arrived. From the mountain town of Boquete, I went to the archipelago of Bocas del Toro in the Caribbean. The style of the architecture as well as the vibe of the town has changed drastically in Bocas del Toro. Not only is it a famous vacation destination also for Panamanians to go to, it also had more of this Afro-Caribbean vibe, and certainly the Caribbean beaches that you would imagine to go along with it. This might be a good time to reflect on the journey. I was really pleasantly surprised by Panama. Not only was the infrastructure absolutely wonderful, particularly in Panama City, there's a metro to get around. Uber was working absolutely fantastic. But also the people of this country make it an absolutely amazing place to be. Wherever I was, I had great conversations. People were incredibly helpful. They wanted to show me around, tell me about their country. They are very proud of their little isthmus in the middle of the 2 Americas, and having managed so many attempts at colonization, conquest, and other political forms of repression, they've made it through all of that, and they have become this incredibly open community that welcomes not just all sorts of diversity, but particularly tourists and visitors. If you're wondering how all this was recorded, for this aerial recordings I used the DJI Neo 2, and for the action part, the underwater part, I used the DJI Osmo Action 4, as well as my Pixel 9 for a lot of the video recordings that were made handheld. Then I also rented a sailboat for a day and had an absolute blast sailing in the archipelago. And finally, of course, I also had to dive in the Caribbean. While the Pacific had this amazing, huge wildlife, the Caribbean is more like diving in a hot tub, quite literally, as the water temperature was about 29-30 degrees. And when you get down there, it's almost like you're in an aquarium with all these colors of the corals, the wonderful recipes, and the smaller sort of macro life that's going on down there. personal highlight of the diving in Bocas was certainly the shipwreck diving, including penetration, which I hadn't done before. And we selected a wonderful shipwreck of a catamaran for that, which wasn't too difficult to get into and which had plenty of light in order not to be too scary. Still, the feeling was absolutely fantastic. A little bit frightening at the beginning to have something on top of your head and no immediate direct access back to the surface in case something goes wrong, but it wasn't too bad, and it was really nice to see the wildlife in there and how the corals and the ocean is taking this man-made structure back and incorporate it into part of the ocean itself. Playa Estrellas, or Starfish Beach in the north of the island, is pretty cool to visit. All you really need is a couple of diving goggles because the starfish are very close to shore and not particularly deep, so you can enjoy some scenes here without any scuba gear on. On the last night, I decided to go for a night dive. I had done this once before, about 15 years ago in Colombia, after I got my original open water certification. But I now, with a bit more experience, wanted to actually enjoy the night dive a lot more. And while it's difficult to really capture a night dive on camera well, at least for me, the feeling of it is absolutely incredible because all you really see is within the beam of your flashlight, and because the light is so close to the corals or anything else underwater, you see its actual colors rather than the colors you see when the sunlight is broken by a bunch of meters of water between the surface and the animals or the corals that you look at. One particularly fascinating aspect of night diving is bioluminescence, which is absolutely impossible to capture on camera, but the idea is that you turn off the flashlights and any sources of artificial lights underwater, and then you stir up the algae or maybe the sand a bit, and the spores are bioluminescent, so you will be floating in a sea of, well, spores, but it looks like basically you're floating in a dark sea full of stars. Like, It's really almost a psychedelic experience. It's like you're floating in the universe. Anyway, really hard to capture on camera. What I did hopefully capture here is another shipwreck that we saw, as well as the fascinating underwater world by night. Finally, it was time to go home, and we did the short stint from Bocas del Toro to Panama City in this little Cessna, which surprisingly was a big highlight of the trip, as I got to see the entire archipelago from above, as well as the shoreline of Panama, and later also the canal with a bunch of ships waiting to go through the Panama Canal. An absolutely fantastic wrap on a wonderful journey through the Isthmus of America.